Hello and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. We are back. My name is Daryl Grove. Taylor's not with me today, but I do have a special guest. Herculez Gomez is the guest on today's show. Herculez Gomez, former player for many, many MLS teams. The final one was Seattle Sounders, MLS Cup winner in 2016. Herculez also played down in Liga MX and played for the US national team, played for and scored for the US national team. He's recently made the move into broadcasting with ESPN. The Max and Herc show has become part of the American soccer broadcasting landscape. It's also available as a podcast, which is how I first became aware of it. Also, turns out, super nice guy. So I was really excited to talk to Herculez about sort of his career, the move into broadcasting, what he's learned, his Gold Cup experience and what he makes of the current Gold Cup roster, and also the gap between MLS and Liga MX. We also took a little Mexican national team as well. So stick around. Here's my interview with Herculez Gomez. So Herculez, thank you for taking the time to join me on the Total Soccer Show, and hello and welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
So yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you. There's so much to talk about. I've got like a long list of topics that I want to put in front of you. The first thing I'm really interested in is your sort of transition from playing to broadcasting. So if I understand correctly, you sort of announced your retirement from playing in January of this year. And it wasn't long until you were with ESPN. In fact, wasn't it the same announcement? Did you announce it all at the same time?
It was kind of the same announcement. Yeah, you know, we had played MLS Cup in December. And before MLS Cup, I knew I was going to retire, and I was fortunate enough to have some options, and I just needed to decide on which route I wanted to go. And I think it was shortly after that, my wife and I had decided this was the best move for us, and we were holding off on announcing it and kind of just announced everything together shortly after. And, you know, right to work, that's all I've ever known is work. So it hasn't been anything different in at least in that front. It's a lot of work. I was surprised and taken aback by the amount of preparation that goes into something like this. I just assumed it was show up and talk, and then I shortly realized it's just like being on the field. If you want to do well on a game day, it starts way before that.
I've got to say, I noticed that for the first time. I think it was on the Max and Herc show when you guys had Jermaine Jones on there in that sort of famous/infamous episode. It was a really good podcast episode. I noticed your questions to Jermaine Jones were sort of on point in terms of getting him to the specific things that you wanted to ask him about. It made me think, oh, this sounds like a guy who's been doing this a good long time, but yet it was only last season that he was, you know, playing for Seattle. So my question is, was it always the plan? Like when you said you had a lot of options to choose from after you announced your retirement from playing, were they all broadcasting options, or was it like a load of other stuff as well? Like, was the plan always broadcasting, I guess, is my question.
No, the plan was never broadcasting. If I'm being honest, the plan was to go into an administrative role and some sort of team management role. I didn't necessarily want to coach. But I wanted to be around the game. I wanted to maybe construct a team, you know, sporting director, GM. That always was of interest for me. And through my playing career, I had some good chances. I was offered, you know, coaching gigs. I was kind of offered to shout around a GM, see if I wanted to get in that role. And it wasn't until I was offered kind of a TV gig. It was MLS Live, you know, digital kind of gig for a day to see if, because our team in Toronto had been out, we actually had a playing game against Montreal, and we didn't make it. So I had to get off. My wife had never been in New York. They were like, hey, come on down, you know, we'll fly you up, all this, just work for the day. My agent said, well, you won't know if you like it unless you do it. So when they did it, and it felt right. It was something refreshing, and it kept me in the game. So what I meant by options was I actually had a few other networks that were interested. So I just had to kind of choose what was the best package for my family and I, whether it was location, opportunity, that kind of thing. And you know, it's fun. It keeps me in the game. There's nothing like playing, you know, soccer, football, whatever you want to call it, in the world. And the closest thing to it for me right now is talking about it. It's the same type of adrenaline rush right before the lights go on.
Right.
It's as close as I'll ever get again to feeling that. So it just felt natural.
And you and Max seem pretty tight. Like, did you guys know each other before, or is that sort of relationship developed just doing the show together?
No, we did know each other before. It's funny. I had a breakout year. My first kind of breakout year as a professional was in LA in 2005.
Yeah, US Open Cup winner, right? You scored the goal.
Yeah, we played the Open Cup and the MLS Cup, and we won them both that year. And I kind of came out of nowhere, and Max was actually the play-by-play guy for the LA Galaxy, so he called all the home games. So I knew him from there, and he'd always been kind of a outgoing, funny personality character. And I remember a few years back, man, hey, it's Max Bretos on SportsCenter. What? And when I got here, he was one of the first guys I reached out to, and he and I just kind of, Steve Polisi, one of the producers at ESPN, kind of put us together, and then like, we're going to give you guys this show. I think you guys are a good mix, and so far it's worked great, and we get along really well on and off the camera. So it's been a good natural fit, and he's an easy guy to get along with. He's so funny and such a nice guy, and he really enjoys the game. I think what's been best about this is he's been itching to get back into something, in the soccer world, and this kind of gives him that outlet. And he's a guy who really enjoys the game, so it's been a lot of fun to do it with him.
So what you mentioned that there was sort of, a lot of stuff that you learned and you put the work in. Can you sort of share any of the big lessons learned in the first, I want to say 6 months or so, right? Big lessons learned in the first 6 months of broadcasting with ESPN.
Yeah, I learned fairly quickly that to get, 15 minutes of content on one subject takes hours and hours and hours of prep, and it doesn't matter how minute your airtime is, you have to make it count. It has to be full of something. It has to be prepared. The audience, the viewer, they'll know if you're not authentic, if you're just trying to wing it, or if you're just going through the motions. It's not something you can do. I'd been playing the game for so long that I forgot what it was to feel mentally exhausted. I'd only felt physical exhaustion, and now I changed it for mental exhaustion. It was a whole different world. I was training different muscles. I wasn't used to, 8-9 hour work days where I have to be on my toes, but mentally. It was just a different feeling, and it took a lot of getting used to. At first, it was a bit overwhelming, and then you have to keep in mind, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I've been playing soccer for the last, since I was 4 years old professionally for the last 17 years. So I didn't know the first thing about the technical terms of being on a set. I didn't know how to prep for things. I didn't know, mannerisms, body language, proper way to say something, to slow down when I'm talking. There are all these things that I had no idea. It's a whole different world. So it was like relearning how to walk in a way, because I'd play the games. I know essentially if you play the game, you know what you're talking about. I'd say majority of people know the game, but few can articulate it in the way they want to. And I found out very quickly I wasn't as good as articulating things I wanted to in my head out loud when I'm nervous. So I had to kind of retrain myself at that.
Yes, it's like things that you maybe know, you just know it from playing, but you've never had to sort of explain it to someone who doesn't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And there are technical terms on the field or things where I was like, well, you should have done this. And it's very easy to say, well, I should have done that.
Right.
But to explain why they should have done it and how they should do it or how they should execute it, now you have to break down the X's and O's, because you have to realize, well, maybe everybody out there doesn't know what you're talking about. You can't assume that the viewer knows exactly what you're talking about. So to be able to break things down like that, it made me think in a different way. And that was difficult at first. It's not as easy as people think. And listen, it's a lot easier than playing the game. It's always easier talking than doing.
Right.
But this is something I've been doing my whole life, so I was used to it. Now I've never been a guy who's talking in front of the camera his whole life, so it took some getting used to. But after the first few months, I started getting more familiar with the settings and more comfortable in my own skin, because you're going to make mistakes. Somebody's going to think you're terrible. Somebody's going to think you're an idiot. Just like when you're on the field, you're never going to please everybody. And as soon as I accepted that, I think things got easier.
Yeah, and I think the idea of you sort of figuring it out, that to me that applies to your career, right? Because I've gone back and watched footage of sort of young Herculez Gomez, and there's a lot of sort of pace and power. And it seems to me like as you went through the years, you sort of got more, I want to say crafty, or just like it was more about figuring out space than relying on pace. Is that a fair assessment of your career progression?
Yeah, that is spot on. When I was younger, I was faster than the majority, and I could hit the ball harder than anybody else.
Right.
And I had a knack for scoring goals. But as I got older, and especially after I injured my knee in Colorado, teams would figure you out. And when your physical abilities aren't up to sniff like what they were,
right,
you have to find different ways of being available in front of the net. And it's reinvention. I reinvented myself as a player multiple times throughout my career. And I think the self-awareness that I had through my career at times sucked, because you realize you're not as good as you think, or you need to be a different player to get on the field. But once on the field, it was all up to you. And I was the type of guy that I would do anything to get on the field. If they wanted me to play fullback, I would play fullback, or it usually meant playing outside mid and kind of being more of a support player. But I knew the type of player I was. I knew that if I could get on the field, I'd have one chance per game. I knew that I was the type of guy that would get one chance per game. And I had to make the most of it. And, in my prime, I thought I was pretty good at that. And I played on some big teams with players that are a lot better than me. And I found a space for myself on the field. And I was always proud of that.
And you're on the US national team a lot. You went to the 2010 World Cup. You also went to the 2013 Gold Cup. And with the 2017 Gold Cup coming up, I really wanted to talk to you about the experience of being on a Gold Cup roster, because I imagine it's I always imagine it as being kind of an odd tournament, because the World Cup is this big event, and you're going to be playing this high quality opposition, but then like this summer the guys are going to be playing Martinique and Nicaragua in the group stage. I know when you played, one of the group stage opponents I think was Cuba. So I wanted to ask you, like, is there what's the sort of talk like within the group when you're going up against guys who just are not at the same level as you, and yet it's still a big competitive competition. So how do you balance those two things?
Well, it was interesting. I guess that the team was a little bit like this go around when I was there. I was one of the, I guess you would say, veteran players on the team for that Gold Cup. Right. A lot of new faces, and the mentality is just win. I think that's always been the great thing about any team or any type of football or soccer in the United States. You have that American spirit about you, that you want to win everything at everything. So it wasn't necessarily difficult to get the guys to get up for it.
Right.
Sometimes playing these teams, yes, it's lesser talent, but those are trap games. Those are the hardest games sometimes. The games that people know you're supposed to win are the most difficult, and especially playing against those type of teams with that type of game where it's much more rough, rigid style of play. I remember getting cracked from behind against Cuba, and I'm thinking to myself, like, what's going on? Any other league in the world, that would have been a red card. Like, and you having to be on your toes. You have to change your game. It was a lot of fun playing in these different cities you normally don't get to play in, playing against these teams you don't normally get to play in. But they're not easy at all. These teams, they tend to make it difficult on you. Playing any actual type of good soccer goes out the window sometimes. Sometimes it's about who wants it more, who takes advantage of their chances, and who minimizes their errors.
And is it sort of, I always imagine that there's a pressure to win big against the smaller teams. And so do you ever feel the pressure of, what if we only beat them 1-0 or 2-0? Like, I imagine the team feeling that against, say, Martinique or Nicaragua. It's almost like you can't win, right, unless you win really big. And then everyone would say, that was an easy team because you won big.
You know what? I can't say I noticed that too much in the States. I've been in that position before in Mexico where my team's been booed off the pitch or off the field for winning 2-0 against a team they felt we should have routed. The game, it's hard enough playing 11v11 when you feel all of a sudden your own fans are on top of you. The game it's played to win. So right. As long as you win, that should be the only important thing. But you're right. Sometimes you do face opposition where you can score 5-6 goals on them, and it's about getting the first and having that dam break, and then everything else, will be smooth sailing. But the hardest goal is the first, and I've recalled many times where we're just shelling a team, and you should be a lot better than this team, or showing that you're a lot better for this team. And in reality, you are showing you're a lot better. You just can't put the ball in the back of the net. And that first one goes in, and and it's like a relief. It's not even like a joy; it's a relief. So it is a strange feeling.
What do you make of the roster, the 23 players that have been chosen for this tournament? Are you excited to watch the US at the Gold Cup this year?
I am. I'm really excited to see how they'll do. I'm more excited because I think it's a different type of player than we've had in the past. We've had youth in the past, but if you look at just like the midfield line that played against Ghana, the way they played, the sophistication of the American player is different now than it was 10 years ago. This type of midfield player, for example, can play in multiple positions in the midfield. They're two-way players, a much more refined player, technically better than they've ever been before. You look at Joe Corona, Kellen Rowe, Kellen Acosta, Dax McCarty, Paul Arriola. These are young players, yes, but their players are getting quality experience at quality places. They've got a huge ceiling. It's exciting to see this type of player coming up through the system. And when this is considered the B-C team, it gives you a lot of hope of where our program is going.
Am I right in thinking you played with Joe Corona at Tijuana?
Yes. And Paul Arriola.
Okay. So I was really interested in, after the Ghana game, I mean, we did it on our show. We put a lot of focus on that sort of Dax McCarty, Kellen Acosta partnership. But rewatching it, Joe Corona's a lot more involved than I realised. And I feel like I haven't seen him for a few years because I don't pay enough attention to, say, Tijuana. Like, I only see him when he plays for the US national team. So I'm wondering, do you have a take on sort of why he was gone for so long, and also sort of what his strengths are and what he brings to the team? Because he kind of looked like a guy who could do a bit of everything when we saw him in that Ghana game, which is very exciting.
Well, I'll start with the Ghana game. For my money, for the first, I want to say, 60 minutes, he was the best player on the field, hands down. His vision, his passing ability, his just touch, being dangerous in front of goal, all those things, he was the most dangerous player for the U.S. men's national team. I know Dom will get the goal, get all the accolades, but if you look at the intelligence of his passing, literally slicing through the heart of the Ghanaian defense with one touch passing.
Yeah,
I thought he was the best player on the field. Why he hasn't been in the program for a while? Well, that's on Joe as well, and his situation at Cholos. The last 2 years, he's kind of been in limbo with Cholos. They sent him to Veracruz, and then from Veracruz, he was loaned out there. He went to the second division in Dorados, which is a team that Cholos also owns.
Uh-huh.
So he kind of was off the radar, per se, with the U.S. men's national team. But he's a player. He's a young player. He's got a wealth of experience. He's a guy who's been plying his trade professionally, probably the longest out of anybody in the national team on that roster today for the Gold Cup.
Right.
If you look at his Primera or his Ascenso pedigree when he was with Cholos, when he was, I believe, like 16, and he was already playing professionally, how he was Rookie of the Year in Mexico, how he ended up going he ended up playing first with the Mexican national team, then he went switched to the U.S. men's national team, then he went to qualification, to Gold Cup, to World Cup qualifiers. He's easily the most experienced player, with the exception of Brad Guzan, I would say,
of course, yeah,
on that roster. He's a guy for as young as he is. He's comfortable with the player he is, and he's not a player that you see a lot in this program. Now it's up to him to take advantage of these opportunities. It does you no good to have all the tools if at the end of the day you can't execute. But he's a guy who I feel can execute. Whether he has a place on the full national team, on the full program, that's up to him. I think he has all the tools. He has the skill sets. He's that type of player. But these are the games where you have to show it, and so far he's been showing it.
So this is his big chance, right? The Gold Cup. He shows really well here. Then he could be involved in the sort of the most senior team going forward.
Well, it was his coming out party last Gold Cup. He made a name for himself. He was a big part of that team and the reason why we won that Gold Cup. So hopefully he can cement himself in this Gold Cup as a starter and catch Bruce's eye, because it's one thing being a good player at a Gold Cup. It's another thing being an impact player in a World Cup qualifier or a World Cup for that matter.
So I want to switch up and talk a little Mexico as well. Can I assume that you sort of also follow the Mexican national team, given you've spent so much time in Liga MX and Mexican parents or Mexican American parents? So, so how much do you watch every game, super into El Tri?
Yes, I watch apart from it's my job, my wife is from Mexico, and she's a huge Mexican fan. So we've got a bit of a rivalry, and I'm also Mexican American. So if they're not playing the U.S., I hope they do well, and personal reasons as well. I have a lot of friends in that team. And I know what these guys go through being in Mexico or that program, and how heavily criticized they are. I guess unjustly at times, and it's an interesting program, and they're a good team. So it's actually fun to watch them as well. So because other than it's my job to watch the U.S. men's national team, Mexican national team, both leagues, I enjoy watching both brands.
So yeah, I always liken Mexico in a weird way to England, because they have the same sort of press just ready to criticize them and put pressure on the coaches.
It's funny you say that.
They both employed Sven at some point.
It's funny you say that. It's funny you say that because I actually think the parallels between the English FA and the FMF, the Mexican Federation, and Liga MX and the Premier League are uncanny.
Oh yeah,
the Liga MX is a league that has had an influx in foreigners, and it's taken away. It's now limiting the opportunities for the domestic product, the Mexican national player. Whereas the same thing happened in the Premier League with the English player. Their opportunities were scarce because of the foreign influx coming through the Premier League. And then you look at both teams. These are teams with huge expectations on them, but in reality haven't done much in the last 30, 40 years.
Right, yeah.
On a global scale. But the media pressure is insane. The attention in the game is insane. The television networks have a lot of pull in both federations and league. The parallels are uncanny.
How do you feel about Osorio? Because he's got the Gold Cup to kind of win back some popularity, but I keep seeing sort of people putting pressure on him. I think I saw Hugo Sanchez suggesting that it was time for Osorio to move on. So it feels like the pressure's building over there.
Yeah, well, to touch on Hugo Sanchez is one of these. So in Mexico, there are a lot of ex-coaches who are the first ones to throw the rock at Osorio.
Right.
And a lot of these coaches don't like the fact that he's a foreign coach coaching the Mexican national team, which is A, extremely xenophobic, and two, and B, very unfitting of a colleague,
right.
or ex-colleague, I should say, to colleagues to do to one another. It has less to do with I guess his actual coaching ability and more to do with they just want him out.
Right.
Juan Carlos Osorio is an excellent manager, an excellent man. He's had some very good moments, and he's had two bad moments with the Mexican national team. He is in an improbable situation. The day he got hired, they are waiting to fire him right now. That's the way it works in Mexico. You get hired to be fired. He's in a lose-lose situation with this Gold Cup, because if he wins it in Mexico, well, you're supposed to win it, and if he loses it, how can you lose this?
Right.
How was it that you lost this? And he's coming off a situation where he's even under more pressure, because in many's eyes, getting to the semifinal game and not playing well against Germany is a failure.
Right.
So it's crazy to think that for two official games against the South American champion, Chile, you lose 7-0, and against the World Cup champion Germany, whether it's a B team, whatever you want to call it, they won the Confederations Cup, and Mexico lost to them. So two times they've lost. World Cup champion, South America, Copa America champion, and he's under pressure for those losses. It's insane to think about, but that's the reality. That's the nature of the beast that he deals with in Mexico.
So my take on it from a distance is that he kind of selects a team that's designed for specific games. I think we talk on the show, we call it horses for courses. You know what I mean? Like he selects a shape and personnel that he thinks suits a particular game plan for that game. And he also it seems to me like he takes some big risks. And I really admire the idea of taking the big risks, but then obviously when it goes wrong, it can go very, very wrong, as it did in the Chile and Germany games.
You know what's funny is he takes these risks and he's crazy. Yogi Löw takes these risks, for Germany.
Yeah.
And he's a genius. It's all about personnel. He does what he can do with what he has at hand. Like Bruce Arena does what he can do with what he has at hand. what any coach can do, what he has at hand. It's just he is judged, he is measured differently, and that blows my mind.
Is there any sort of unknown or lesser known players on the Mexico roster for the Gold Cup that we should be keeping an eye on? Anyone you're sort of excited for the world to see?
Well, I don't think many Americans, or for that matter, the world, know about Orbelin Pineda. He's a player that came up through the Querétaro system, and he got sold to Chivas, and he's, for my money, one of Chivas' best players. He's a very good two-way midfielder. You can put him anywhere in the midfield line. He's dynamic, explosive, good on 1v1 situations, whether it's defending or attacking. He's a very good player for his age, and I don't think he's going to be in Mexico for much longer if he keeps going at that pace. He's one. And Pizarro, who's another offensive threat for Chivas, who's going to be with the Mexican national team, is another guy. He's very clever on the ball, finds good spaces, finds himself always in the right moment in front of goal. He scores timely goals. I don't know if Chivas would have had that championship run last season if it were not for him. So those are two players I'm really excited to see in this Gold Cup.
All right. I think I saw you on Twitter sort of leading the charge for call up Cubo Torres. Has that happened or not yet?
Yeah, it happened. And to be fair, I wasn't leading the charge. I was pointing out that he's the only 9 that's healthy.
So, I see.
Yeah, Oribe Peralta for Club America, who's a Confederations Cup.
Yeah.
His club had originally said that, he's 33 years old. They need to rest him. Playing in 2 tournaments wouldn't have been the most ideal situation. So Cubo, by default, was the only healthy Mexican player, Mexican 9 available, but he has this stigma of playing in the MLS down south, so they were very skeptical about it. But the way things are going right now in Mexico, with the amount of opportunities domestic players get, the other players who play in the offensive line in front of them, and Barragan and Sepulveda, they're not big players on their club team. Sepulveda is not even a starter at his club team, and they're not even natural 9s. This guy's scoring goals, and he's scoring them in bunches. He's got confidence at the moment, and he's healthy, and he plays that position. So I felt like a no-brainer. So
this leads me to the final thing I was really interested in asking you about, which is you played for a lot of teams in MLS, a lot of teams in Liga MX, and I want to talk about sort of the difference between the two leagues. Like I didn't know, for example, what you just told me about Torres and how that sort of playing in MLS sort of damages his chances essentially, because the selectors from Mexico don't view it as good a competition essentially. So I guess I want to ask about the gap.
The press doesn't view it, and that's the problem. They're very influential out here.
So do you see what do you see the gap being? Is it as big as, say, the Mexican press makes it out, and is it as big as, say, some of the more nervous MLS fans make it out to be? Because there's a lot of MLS feels that we're very, very, very far behind. So I wanted to get your take on how big the gap is and whether it's closing or not.
Well, I don't think it's a huge gap, but there is a gap. And you're talking about a league that some clubs have had over 100 years experience as a professional franchise, and to another league where it's 22 years old.
Right.
There are pros and cons in both leagues, like in any league. And it's funny because people ask me about the style of play and, hey, what's the difference here? What's the difference there? Like, what are the leagues like? I always say, well, it's like looking at the Premier League and looking at La Liga in Spain. Now, for comparison's sake, let's just say, I'm not comparing them to these leagues.
Right, got you.
But it's preference. It's style, it's preference, and at the end of the day, it's also results. With the CONCACAF Champions League, you look at the English teams in the Champions League, they're non-existent past the quarterfinals.
Right.
And they've been that way for a while. Well, this has been the case with the program out here in MLS. When it comes to Champions League, that's going to be the measuring stick for most, because they've been non-existent in championships, in those finals and championships. So that'll always be used to measure the two leagues. And when you play a kind of one or two off system like that, and a team who's no longer in the rhythm they were the year before, who starts in their preseason of competition, who faces another team who's already in mid-competition with more of a rhythm, more of the same team that actually was that championship team, and they play each other, and one's already hard-pressed for depth. They have a salary cap. They're dealing with other limitations, and the other one has no salary cap, plenty of depth, and now plays at home in their stadium where they're accustomed to playing in hostile environments, where it's going to take its toll. And when you're based off that one-off game and all of a sudden the MLS team loses by 3 or 4 goals or loses in a bad way, that's how they'll measure it. They don't take the body of work. They'll take that 1 or 2 off game system, and it's kind of unjust because I feel like MLS is behind the 8 ball in that matter. It's hard enough playing 11v11, but all of a sudden when there's in an MLS team, if I'd say compared to a Liga MX team to compete, I'd say player 1 through 9, maybe 10 can compete, but then the drop off from 11 to 25 is pretty big. So it's hard enough to compete when it's 11v11, but then you take injury, suspension, run of form, illness, or just a bad game, and now you're playing against a Liga MX team that's just a lot deeper, that doesn't have to deal with a lot of that stuff. Well, it gets very difficult.
Final thing, so I know we're going to let you go very soon. I want to ask you basically what is coming up with the ESPN FC show with Max and Herc.
Well, we're still doing it every week. I'm going on the road from quarterfinals on for Gold Cup, so I'll be in all the venues that the USMNT national team will be, which is Philadelphia, Arlington, Texas, Santa Clara, California. So we'll bring Max and Herc to all those venues. Max and I will keep it going. I'll be on the road, and we'll make it so we can still keep it going and go from there. We're looking to get more guests, more exciting guests, trying to keep it lively, fun, because that's what Max and I are about. It's not always going to be serious like it happened to be in the Jermaine Jones interview. It just happened to go that way. But we'd love to get the league's biggest stars for MLS, and we also I'm planning to line up a few of the stars south of the border, because there are plenty who speak English. Stars like Miguel Layún, Chicharito Hernandez, Héctor Herrera, Moises Muñoz, Héctor Moreno, Andrés Guardado. I'm trying to line up some of those guys, get them on the show, because I think they've got unique stories that maybe our Anglo audience isn't used to hearing. And this is what I think is about our show is I get it all the time from both audiences, where if you're typically a Liga MX fan or a Mexican national team fan and you tune in, you come away learning something about the MLS or American soccer, and you're like, well, I didn't know that, and you're intrigued by it, so you want to learn more, and vice versa, where all of a sudden, if you're an MLS or US men's national team fan, you come away learning a lot more about the Mexican program and the league, and it intrigues you. So I think it's informative, I think it's intriguing, I think it's hopefully enjoyable for people, and I know, so we're happy to keep it going.
Yeah, actually, a big thing for me is I always want to watch more Liga MX, but I feel like I don't have like an in on the narratives. You know what I'm saying? And I think it's a language barrier, because I'm what the word be unilingual. So there's a challenge for me. But yeah, I feel like if I heard from more players and like had a feel for their personalities and knew a bit more about the narratives behind, it would maybe be an easier entry point to then start watching.
Absolutely, and that's all it is. People sometimes fear the unknown. So they consider the U.S. the enemy, consider Mexico the enemy. But then you start learning about each other. You realize, what, our programs are a lot similar than I realized, and we go through the same problems as anybody else in the world. And it's good to see that we're not that far off. You talk to any Mexican fan, and they love the structure, the discipline, and the marketing. They love the glamour. All that is MLS, and you talk to an MLS fan, and they love the talent, they love the passion, the fans, all this is Liga MX. And when they realize that they're not that far apart from each other, I think is when they get more interested.
All right, that's a great note to end it on. So thank you, Herculez Gomez, for coming on the Total Soccer Show. Really enjoyed talking to you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
So there you go. That was Herculez Gomez. Told you he was a good guy, right? Really interesting guy to talk to. Max and Herc, the show, is available on ESPN. It's also available as a podcast. If you're still missing Taylor Rockwell, then I've got good news for you. He will be back in studio later this evening, this very same day. We'll be recording our USA v Panama Gold Cup preview. So please check your feed later today for our USA Panama Gold Cup preview show. All right, thank you for listening to the Total Soccer Show, and I'll talk to you again very soon.